Matthew, thank you so much for joining us on Phase Zero. First and foremost, as a massive fan of the show, and I know I'm not alone in that feeling, what has it been like to kind of see the fan response so far?
The fan response has been unbelievable because, we've been making the thing for so long and we sort of are doing it in our own little cocoon, and we like what we're doing, but it's one of those jobs where until it sort of goes out into the ether, you have no idea, like, are we just in a bubble and we're not sure and we're wrong about this, or are we right? And it's something that people are actually going to enjoy. So being able to see people actually respond to it and respond well, and the thing that I'd never done before, but that I've been having a lot of fun, is actually watching fan reaction videos to episodes. Like, I don't rewatch the episodes, I watch the fan reaction videos. And those are brilliant because seeing people get really excited about individual things that they're picking up on, or, seeing something happen and they're like, I know what that is. Oh, this is amazing, is really, really fun. And so that's actually been the part of it that's been one of the parts of it that are the most enjoyable to me.
I love that. So what was kind of your X-Men fandom before you joined the show? Like, were you a fan of the comics? Did you watch the movies? What was your familiarity?
So I wasn't able to watch the show when it was originally on because I was in boarding school in England. So I was effectively in child prison and they did not allow me to watch cartoons. But so my initial exposure to it was random comic books that kids would happen to have, which meant that nothing was continuous. It was not all, comics from the same era or the same writer or the same anything. So it was kind of hard to really have too much of a cohesive idea of it. It was just, well, these look cool usually and the characters are cool and really amazing stuff is happening. But I didn't actually have a cohesive narrative to it until the film started coming out. And so that was when I was, at that point, that was also when I was in university. So I was then able to start following it and go, oh, okay, well, now I can actually see where they come from, where they go, how the relationships develop. That was my first cohesive idea of it. And then, since then, in the ensuing sort of 20 years, obviously, there's now far easier access to go, wait, hold on, who is that? And let me go and find out any backstory about that I can and sort of go on from there.
That is so fascinating. So do you have a favorite comic run now that you've kind of gone back and done the research?
I mean, and this is kind of cheating, but as soon as as soon as production showed me sort of stills of like what Magneto was going to look like in this iteration, and I said, that's a different outfit than the one from the original series. And they said, yeah, this is from, issue 200. And this is, this image that was on the cover of it, of him in shackles, is actually, we're going to sort of have that in the show. I immediately went back and sort of got online in the back of my head going, I really hope this is not a $2,000 comic book, because I knew it was old. I just didn't know anything about it. So I was just really hopeful that it wasn't, a $2,000 really rare comic book. And unfortunately, it's not. So I was able to pick that one up and then sort of start from there. And so sort of selfishly, that one I've really been enjoying.
I love that. So did you feel any pressure to kind of dive into a role that is not only iconic, but as you said, you didn't originate the character, like there was the animated series before you?
There is definitely pressure and there's definitely some stress. One of the things that was really nice in talking with, Meredith and Bo and Jake and everybody as we were sort of working through it, they said, the end of the original series has this big shift with where Charles goes and the decision that Eric makes, like at the end of it, in order to try and help his friend. They said, and there's this big shift, and we're continuing through that with how we go into this new season with the decisions and the choices and the things that Eric is trying to do. So that makes for a shift in his overall outlook. So what we're really looking at is trying to make sure that if somebody is watching, if somebody sits down and watches the show from 92 to 97 and then just bowl straight into this one, that it doesn't sound like a totally different person, but there should be some little difference in him because his whole outlook is kind of shifting, or at least he's trying to shift it. So we want the voice to sound like the same person, but maybe that they're coming at things from a slightly different aspect. And that helped take a little bit of the pressure off me, because following somebody like David, who did such a phenomenal job and is so beloved, there's a stress to that. And there's always you kind of have to reconcile yourself to, in an ideal world, a third of the people love what I do, a third of the people are like, it's fine, and only a third of the people are saying, you've destroyed my childhood and I will forever hate you. And so the hope is like, if you can get those first 2/3 to be bigger than 2/3 and that last one to be smaller than a third, then that's kind of successful. And fortunately, it seems like people on the whole have responded really positively, which has been lovely and has been a huge weight off, because following David was always going to be a pretty daunting task.
So you mentioned X-Men 200. The UN speech in episode 2 is just unbelievable. That is like one of my favorite scenes, I think, in any X-Men media. What was it like to play that?
Yeah, that one, I can't say enough about the stuff that I've got to do in this whole series. I mean, Magneto, being who he is, gets to talk a decent amount and gets to sort of, make a pretty good argument for his point of view. And initially reading that scene and reading through that speech, and then like that was one that we tweaked a lot. Like we went back to that in additional recordings, because they would decide to change just a line or a word, and every single time they said, we would read it and think, this is phenomenal, this sounds great, and then they would come back and change sometimes just one line or one word, and you would go, oh, okay, oh no, that's better, that hits harder, it's more cutting, it's more succinct, it's more emotionally rich. And so they kept working on honing it down, and we kept working on like, okay, how do we get more into it? And it, those sorts of things, that was just fun. You read that, and then especially the whole speech is so good and is so sort of cutting, in that it's not a plea and it's not a defense. It's this is why this happened, and I'm willing to take responsibility for my part of it, but I'm not letting you off the hook for the bits of it that are your responsibility. And then going into where that scene goes to, leading to what I still think is one of the coldest and most terrifying threats that I've ever heard made, is really, really cool. And so to get to do that speech, and then to have it go into that bit where you see him struggling so much to maintain what he has promised Charles that he would do, and the outlook that he's promised that he would take, and still going, but let's not be clear. Let's be clear that it's not that I can't do what I've always done. I'm choosing not to. And if you push me far enough, I can change my mind. And the way that whole thing was put together, and the way that it was written, and then once I saw what the directors and animators had done, like it worked so well. So it was a blast to get to do, and it was really amazing to finally get to see, once it was all realized, what it looked like when everybody else had put their parts into it, and when like the Newton Brothers music was in there and everything. It all added to it, and it made me look way better, which was great for me.
So completely shifting gears, we have to talk about the love triangle. I know we've been talking about it on the show basically every single week, because it has just been so fun to see the interplay with Magneto and Rogue and Gambit. How have you approached that as an actor, knowing that it would kind of like break the internet and get people very invested?
That's one where, again, I have to admit, like, I didn't know that there was history in the canon for that. And so we talked about it, and it was, the explanation of that is a relation that's not something that came about in this interaction. That was something that was there historically before Rogue and Gambit, and it's a revisiting of that. And then when you see the bits of the justification for why, of like, they can be more open and more, for want of a better phrase, human with each other than either of them can be with a lot of other people. It makes a huge amount of sense in terms of like knowing that it would make some people very, very upset, or very sad. That's kind of like, that's one where you go, yeah, this is gonna drive a bunch of people crazy, and that's just gonna be fun.
I loved the picture the three of you took at that convention, kind of leading into it. Like, that was just so much fun.
Yeah, we had done a panel at WonderCon, and then we were all at dinner afterwards. And of course, there was 20 people at this, so you couldn't fit around one table. So there was a table and a couple of booths, and AJ had been in a booth with, like 6 other people, and it happened that Lenore and I were sitting next to each other, and someone had said, oh, let me get a photo of the two of you. And then I looked and realized that at that exact moment it happened that everybody had left AJ's booth, and it was one of those moments where after, hours of kind of doing a panel and talking to people and being on, AJ was just having a moment where he was being able to be like, okay, I don't have to be on, I don't have to do anything, I can just rest. And it was just a case of going like, right, well, just make sure you frame AJ in there. And then of course somebody started coming back, so we had to go, no, get out of there, leave AJ alone, make him be alone and lonely for a minute, just so we can get that photo. And it was, it worked out well, and it was a lot of fun, and so it ended up fitting the whole narrative pretty well.
I love it. So of course I have to ask about this week's episode. We got the moment. We got Magneto was right. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. That entire sequence was just unbelievable. What was your reaction? One of the really, really nice things has been, I get the scripts that I'm in, and a lot of the time, like, I've not necessarily spent a huge amount of time focusing on parts of scripts that are not the bits that I'm responsible for working on and making come alive. So one of the really fun things about the show airing has been being able to see the episodes that I didn't even read the scripts for, and so I didn't know what was happening, and then being able to see the scripts that I did read actually fully realized. And so knowing kind of what it's been building to throughout the first 7 episodes, and knowing, these last 3, how the whole thing comes to a head and wraps up. One of the things that I was really looking forward to was like, okay, what does it actually look like once Magneto has, found himself in the situation he finds himself in for the majority of this episode, and then when he does get loose, what does that choice of his actually visually look like? What does it look like when he decides to do that? Because there are a million ways you can do it, and being able to see like how they did it and how they sort of visually represented it was really, really cool. I don't know how much detail to go into because I don't know whether this is where some people have watched it, some people haven't. And so like that's always been my conversation with everybody is they say, oh, we watch a show. I go, great. What episode are you up to? And if they're like, well, I'm up to like episode 6. I go, okay, then I have to adjust what we talk about kind of thing. Or if they're like, well, I'm up to episode 4. I'm like, then we really have to adjust how we talk about what's happened. So yeah, for anybody who is up to date, which as of right now is sort of episode 8, the ending of that episode, which is, I don't know if production would describe it this way, but to me, these last 3 episodes kind of exist almost as like a feature in and of themselves. So this first one is kind of like act 1 into, you have the big incident that switches you into, the second act of the story. And there's a couple of things that are a part of that, but, the Bastion's activities and then Magneto's response, and then sort of getting everybody finally in the same geographical place. So it's like, okay, all the players are now on the board, and like literally on the board. They're not scattered to the 4 winds. Everybody is in position now. How do we solve this? Because this is going to be a really complicated Rubik's Cube. So out of the episodes we have seen so far, what is your favorite scene that you have been a part of? This is kind of silly, but I've got to be honest. The scene where, and it's a short one, where Cyclops brings coffee to Magneto. I love that scene. Just because part of it is, the arc that Cyclops has in this first season is so good, and Ray does such an amazing job with that character. And that's there are a lot of traps in that character, and Ray just flies through it incredibly. And seeing, where Cyclops starts in his reactions to Magneto, and then, at that point in that episode where he's starting to sort of loosen up a little bit and warm up to him, and just that, 3-line interaction, there's just something about that I really, really enjoyed. It was fun to do, but it was really fun to actually see, on screen and see how it was then executed, and like the looks on both of their faces and the body language and all that kind of stuff was a lot of fun. I love Cyclops, so I love that answer. That was such a perfect answer. So what would you say has surprised you the most about the experience of working on this show? Well, one of the things that I was always aware of with X-Men was how allegorical the story was, and the characters were, and their situation was, and how much it represented any myriad of marginalized populations. And so I understood, I knew that intellectually, but I have been in a fortunate position in my life, and I have not had to deal with that by virtue of just who I was when I was born, the way I was born. And being involved in the show, which has such an incredible representation across the spectrum, of every spectrum in terms of the people who are making it, but then interacting with fans and people who've seen it and getting to see and to hear how it has landed with them, and how much so many different people have sort of come up to me and said, this bit and this bit and that bit is one of the first times that the X-Men that spoke to me, that I felt saw me, I've seen represented in not just in one
run of the comic books, but in sort of a mass media representation. That's been incredible. And that's actually shifted how I understand it and how I look at it and how it sort of, what I understand that it means to other people. Like I said, I had the intellectual understanding, but it wasn't quite as clear to me sort of emotionally or in terms of empathy or sympathies. And it's becoming much more clear. And so it's sort of shifted my understanding of that by the responses of people to it, which I had not experienced before. So that was something that I didn't expect going in. I wasn't like, oh, this is going to alter how I understand that other people need to see themselves and their situations represented in the media, and it has. And that's been really, really cool.
I love that. So kind of going off of that, obviously you can't share specifics, but what do you hope people take away from the season as a whole, especially once the final 2 episodes come out?
Well, you mentioned earlier the speech of the UN in episode 2, and one of the things that was really spectacular about that was that they put the overall mission statement of the show in the second episode, coming out of, one of the characters, when everybody, not just watching the show, but everybody in the show was focused on it, because this was Magneto on trial at the United Nations. Everybody on the planet in the world at the time was focused on watching, well, how is this going to go? Because half of them see him as a threat and half of him see him as a potential savior. So what is laid out in that speech is really an ideal distillation of what the show is trying to say. And I am not better with words than the writers, so I can't do better justice than that. But that idea of this is one, like it or not, we all live in the same place, and we don't have a choice about that. So rather than trying to figure out ways to separate ourselves when we're never going to be able to do that, we need to figure out how to work together. And that doesn't mean ironing out any differences or anything that we don't recognize or aren't naturally comfortable with. That means, okay, everybody is different. Let's figure out how to take people for what they are and not try and make them fit into our idea or our model or our, wish for the way the world might be.
That's beautiful. So the show has obviously had Easter eggs to the larger Marvel universe. Do you personally kind of have a dream Marvel crossover of a character you would really love to have your Magneto meet?
Let's see. Who would be I mean, they're the obvious ones. Like if you're looking in terms of what Marvel has been doing recently, there's fun ones. Like Magneto might have been an interesting addition into the Thanos thing, because the glove is metal. So it's one where I'm like, I mean, Magneto might have been able to solve that relatively quickly. I don't know. I don't know what it was actually made out of. It looked metal, but so there's things like that where you can have a lot of fun with it, starting to say, okay, well, to what extent does this person's powers actually give them an ability to manipulate whatever that is? Or so you go, okay, well, what could he do with that? Or what can he do with this? It's like the interactions between Magneto and Wolverine have always been so much fun, because Wolverine has such a, I don't care attitude. And then Magneto's always just looking at him going like, I can literally disassemble you because you're made of what I manipulate. So it's always been a fun, that's always been a fun interaction going through the entire first series, and even in the movies and in comics and everything like that. So, the person in the XMen IP that I've always really, really liked and just found fascinating is Sebastian Shaw. He's already been in the show a little bit. I think that there's a lot of fun just because of his personality and the way his powers work and things like that. I think there's a reason why in a lot of the comics he's been, gone in and out as a major force on both sides. I've always just found that character kind of fascinating. So that's one where if there was more stuff coming up, that interacted with him, but that's outside of the, could Magneto have just solved Endgame much more quickly? Which obviously narratively and dramatically is not as useful. It's like, oh, we're all fighting this thing, or this is one guy who just goes, and it's done. Kind of negates it. But yeah, there's a lot of fun things that you can sort of go, ooh, how would that work? Kind of interactions.
Maybe we can get that as a what if episode someday. Now I'm going to be thinking about the logistics of it, because that is a great idea. Yeah. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on Phase Zero. And again, congrats on the show. You guys have done such a phenomenal job.
Thank you so much. Thank you for chatting with me. It's always, like I said, we spent so much time working on it and having to keep everything quiet. It's really fun now to actually be able to talk about it.